A major hailstorm, actually two major hailstorms, hit Wichita last night, making it a 5-star hail map. Thanks for joining me. I'm meteorologist Taylor Cox, and pretty soon we're going to bring in CEO of HailTrace, Derik Kline, to talk about these major hailstorms that happened yesterday. But first, I want to get you a breakdown and really set the story, set the scene of what happened last night. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about these hailstorms, but I want to give you an idea of what happened if you haven't heard about it. Wichita, McPherson, Park City, and Hayesville, Kansas all got hit with large hail last night. 3-inch size hail, so just slightly larger than the size of a baseball, landed on a good portion of 135 and then I-35 all the way down into Wichita. Over 200,000 structures were impacted in this area. And if we zoom down into Wichita, you can actually see the breakdown of these two different storms. But we're going to get to Derik Kline in just a few minutes and talk with him about these storms. I want to show you exactly what happened because these storms blew up. At 4:40 yesterday, we had nothing on the radar. By 4:50, I-70, we started to see a few of those really tall clouds produce rain. And then all of a sudden, by 5 o'clock, baseball-sized hail coming down in Salina. It is now a significant severe thunderstorm warning. In the words of the National Weather Service, it could produce considerable damage. But we didn't stop there. We saw a cluster of storms continue to track down to the south along 135 into McPherson, Kansas. This is whenever we started to say, hang on, this could hit Wichita, and it did. It continued to track down to the south into Newton. We had tons of hail reports of baseball-sized hail, tennis ball-sized hail, golf ball-sized hail, all along this area. And then it continued, of course, the National Weather Service saw this coming into Wichita. We had not one, but two storms here, and you can see them line up perfectly. Here's your first storm coming into the north central side of the city, and here's your second storm that would eventually hit the west side of the city. Now, this is where I want to bring in Derik Kline, CEO of HailTrace. Now, Derik, you have a better radar than I do on your side of the screen, so I want you to break down exactly what our meteorologists see as they map this storm. They really break down this view.
Yeah, Taylor, it's really unique. So we obviously have a radar version that's made for TV, but when you step back behind the scenes and you see what our team of meteorologists are dissecting and what they're taking a look at, in order to provide a more accurate representation of what this storm actually looked like, it's really amazing to see how that's dissected. And so what my goal here today would be is to actually give you inside access into what the team of meteorologists are doing. Okay, so what are they looking at? What are the things that go into them deciding where was their large hail? Where was their high volumes of hail? Maybe the duration of hail was a little bit longer. We're going to help you understand every aspect of both of these hailstorms that move through the Wichita area, and maybe even give you a little bit more insight into where some of that damage occurred from than what you might even be able to tell from one of our hail maps. How about that? So this is going to be really, really special opportunity for contractors that are thinking about working this. If you are a contractor, you're going to want to watch the full length of this video to help you understand exactly what went into making each segment of this storm damaging. So Taylor, you left us off right there with that view, and we're almost looking at the exact same view that you had, but we're going to take it in now and show you just how detailed we can get. So we're going to zoom in, and we're going to start with storm number 1, which is right here at Park City, Kansas. And you can see this storm is I mean, it just looks wild, right? If you've done anything on radar, you can kind of tell this looks like a really impactful storm. What we have here is we have lots of inflow coming into this storm here. I love this because I'm going to be able to give you in kind of a write-up here of what this looks like. Now, I've got this broken down into 4 panels. Okay, so our panel 1, which is right here, okay, is going to be our base reflectivity. So that's telling us how heavy the precipitation is that's falling. Okay, is it if it's large objects, it's going to look heavier, right? It's going to look like a lot of raindrops, or if it's a lot of raindrop, it's going to look like a lot of raindrops. Then we're going to look over here at our correlation coefficient. Obviously, this is going to carry over across all of them. So this is what we call our CCs. And our CCs, what are going to be really important about this, this helps us understand, really in layman's terms, where are the large objects that are in this. So if it was debris from a tornado, it would pick that up. But in this case, we're going to look for this to have large hail. So the lower the CCs, the larger the hail. Then we're going to bounce down here to our differential reflectivity. And what this is going to help us do is it's going to help us focus on what is the predominant precipitation type. Do we have a big mixture, or is it a lot of one type of precipitation or a lot of another? And then our bottom right-hand corner looks really pretty. It's got lots of purples and greens on it. But what this one really is going to help us focus on is what is going on in the storm cloud. Are we seeing some melting with this hail? Which could mean that as it gets to the surface, it could be smaller. So that's what we're going to break down. And I'll go through each panel as we move through and really highlight some areas on that. But as this storm moves through. So we're going to track it down to the south and east now. And you can see, so right here, we've got an interstate. See if I can get the roads. Hopefully they pop up. There's 235 is coming up right here. There we go. Is that 254 it looks like. So there's 254 right here, and you can see we've got all the roads. You've got your little, Wichita's known for its kind of gridded structure there with one by one, mile by mile grids. If you're from the Wichita area, a lot of this stuff is going to make sense. So I've kind of zoomed us in here, and we still have our inflow notch. So we're going to turn our pin back on, and we're going to kind of start to dissect this. So we still got our inflow notch coming into the storm right here. Now look how messy this looks though, right? You're like, okay, so how do we start to dissect this storm to understand what's going on? Because if I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, right, large hail all over this whole purple area right here that we're going to see, some potential for significant hail. It's telling me that whole area I should be seeing significant hail. So what am I breaking down? What am I understanding? So here are a few things that I want you to be able to take note of. So this again lets me know, this area right here lets me know which areas have more hail and less raindrops. So I'm highlighting this area, and I also highlight this area right in here. So see how we have a more concentration of these gray colors right here? That's telling me that I'm seeing a higher, at least a potential for a higher concentration of hail. Okay. Now we need to look at that in relation to what we're seeing up here in our base reflectivity as well. So just because one shows one thing doesn't mean that the other equals that. Okay. So we have to be very careful because, for example, the lower the correlation coefficient, it would tell me that this area, because I have lots of greens and blues up here, that it should be large hail. But when I come over here to the base reflectivity, those don't align. Okay. So what I want to look at is where are my lowest CC values to let me know where I have large hail. So I'm going to draw, and it's going to get messy, right? But this is what our meteorologists are dealing with on a daily basis, is trying to kind of dissect this area right here. And so now all of a sudden you can see I've got lots of areas that I've now colored in, and I'm starting to see the picture of what's going on. Now this is over north. This is over North Wichita, okay, and we're gonna finalize this radar image here in just a second. But then I've got this area right here, right? Look at all this. What does this mean? This is an area that has a higher volume of melting going on. Okay, so the radar is saying that these hailstones are melting at a higher rate. So it's not as likely to see large hail at the surface. So I've drawn in a bunch of stuff, and at the end of the day, what does it mean for you? Well, what I'm thinking is based off of this, that we're going to be seeing in this, let's clear it off here. So we're going to clear everything off here. And so what I'm seeing here when I look at this is that I've got an area, I've got a big area, turn the pin back on here. I've got an area, a large area right here that has big hail. So potential golf ball, tennis ball, baseball size hail falling in this area. But the area that I'm most interested in seeing the potential for damaging hail, like so higher volumes of hail, seeing more of the large hail is actually going to fall back in here. So I like this area right back in here, which is the updraft region of the storm, is the area. And then potentially I kind of see a little bubble possibly happening right in here. Okay, so I've got two areas that I like in this storm, but I also think you have to be careful as in this area right in here, that we might end up seeing a high volume of golf ball size hail. So it may not be the baseballs that you're seeing over here, but you're going to see a higher volume of golf ball size in this part of the storm. Okay, so quarter to golf ball size hail, it's not as large as what we would see back here. And you might even be able to do that a little bit up here on the top of this one, kind of up in that area. Okay, so that's a breakdown. I don't know if the pin, let's see if the pin zooms in right. It may not work very good here. Actually, I can't zoom in at all whenever I have the pin on. So it's going to lock it in there. But basically what you're looking at is this area kind of back here where 235 and this, I can't remember what the interstate I said it was, 254 maybe. Kind of this intersection right here, probably where you're going to see the largest hail. Only hail is falling. There's not a lot of rain falling in this area, but it could be just a little bit more isolated. And you could see a higher volume on the east side of the storm. So hopefully that kind of breaks down and makes sense. So I'm going to clear this off and we're going to bounce forward to a couple more radar frames down. Let's get it into the heart of Wichita here as we kind of take a look at this storm. So a couple things that I want to point out though as we move this loop forward. You can see our inflow notch. So we've got our inflow notch right here, right in here, right? So the storm is kind of punching down in. But notice how that inflow notch, and I can't move it, I don't think, nope. But notice how that inflow notch as we come down here becomes a little less organized. So we have our outflow boundary right here. And notice how it doesn't really have that bulge in that's happening right there where we're getting that air sucking in. So as a meteorologist, what I would be thinking in this case is that we might be watching a storm getting ready to weaken. So it's been producing large hail. So if radar indications say we're still having large hail, then we're going to go with it that we're still getting large hail. But expect that you might see some weakening begin to happen with this storm here in the near future. You might also see the large hail shift into a different part of the storm because the updraft region is going to become weaker, and so the rotation is going to become weaker, which is going to allow the larger hail to shift over into more of the downdraft region as it kind of tries to dump its hail out. So those are things that I would be watching for to see, does that align with what's going on here in the storm. And so now we've got the storm now, which is, so here's, basically downtown Wichita is right over, got to always remember to turn on my pencil. Downtown Wichita is kind of right in this area, right? So just off to the east of downtown Wichita. So what do we've got going on here? So again, let's go down and break it down. We've got our big pink base reflectivity. Doesn't always mean large hail, right? So what I want to do is I want to focus on this correlation coefficient. Is there an area that stands out to me that I would highlight? So I'm going to go ahead and start drawing in some of this area here. And it kind of makes a funny shape here. And really kind of comes all the way down across and then down into here and then up into here. And notice what I'm doing. I'm highlighting these areas of the yellows and the blues and the greens. And this could be a little bit of a radar echo, but we do have a highlighted area of blue there. So I'm going to highlight that just to see if it's something. And so then I'm going to come down here to my differential reflectivity, because that's where I'm going to see higher volumes or at least more predominant hail. And I'm going to notice that's actually occurring in this part of the storm right there, which makes sense with what I see with reflectivity. Also kind of lines up with my CCs. And then my melting kind of cuts some of that off, right? So maybe kind of through there looks pretty good. And then back into this part of the storm over here looks pretty good. And then it still looks pretty good all the way down through here, which also aligns. Remember we said the updraft is going to be where that comes in. That aligns, which means my largest hail is still happening where my updraft is. So if I were to highlight an area that I would say I kind of forget to turn my pencil on again. So we're going to highlight this area right in here. Is kind of our area where we feel like the largest hail is happening. This northern part up here probably was already impacted with large hail, but they're seeing some smaller hail begin to come down. They're seeing some volume, probably some heavier rain and hail mixture. There are probably still a few golf balls coming down, but you're seeing definitely more of the quarter size stuff. And then this area down here is beginning to see some larger hail come in. to this area down here. So it's beginning to shift and move into this area. All right, let's come back out again here, kind of reset the stage now. So you can see we still got our core, our big hailstorm now moving through the east side of Wichita. Our other storm is up here, and notice everything still has inflow, which is really important here, is that we still have the inflow here, and then we've got the inflow here, and we've got a new storm trying to fire on this outflow boundary over here. But everything's still looking good. So let's go back into Wichita here, because we're going to continue focused on the higher population of Wichita. And we are getting reports that are coming in, right? So we've got an MPing report here of quarter size hail. And we're going to use this data as much as we can. Half inch probably came in before the storm really got going there. So we've got, let's see here. We've got another quarter report here. I mean, look at that. So MPings are definitely very address specific. They use GPS. So right on the edge of the storm, and we talked about this as being an area where the hail was kind of starting, right? I mean, literally right on the edge. You know, you're probably getting quarters there and not quarters here. I mean, it's that close. So really, really interesting. And that's our meteorologists really able to do such a good job of drawing that hail yes, hail no line. It's the algorithms really struggle with this. The meteorologist really able to hone that line in and then go, okay, no, I think this is where my bigger, and then this is where my bigger comes into play. So it's really interesting how they're able to do that and how the radar gives the answers, but as you tilt up, it struggles to understand that. Okay, so we're going to bounce it forward here, a couple more frames. Notice we got our inflow notch back, which is really interesting here, that the storm kind of cycled back. If I go back a frame, you can see, you know, the hook echo shape, the kidney bean shape of the storm here. So it's got its inflow back now. And then here's our outflow boundary, which means our air is coming up and in right into this area here. We've got an Air Force Base, Dias, I think it's, maybe it's not Dias. What's the name of it? It's in Andover. I'm not going to get the name of it off the top of my head, but you're in, what is it?
Is it Eisenhower?
Is it Eisenhower? Could be, I don't know. Popular for some tornadoes. Notice our reflectivity though on this storm, still really, really high, right? If I were to draw out this reflectivity here, still really, really strong reflectivity. Now my large hail, interestingly enough, is actually going to come back here. Look, notice the CCs really drop off all the way back here into the tail of the storm. And then notice they're actually not very high. They're not very low over here. I mean, there's some CCs there, but they're not very low. And then check this out. Look at all of this yellow and purple now, or yellow and green that we have. This area, while you would think, because earlier this area was producing really large hail, it is still producing a good volume of hail because my correlation coefficient here is still pretty low. I'm not fired up about this part of the storm. I think we're getting some quarters, some half dollars. It's probably really wet. We're seeing a lot of rainfall down, but at the end of the day, the largest hail, which in my opinion has come back. The hail size, even though we still have our inflow notch, is not what it was earlier. So I'm starting to trend back on. You're probably still getting some intermittent large hailstones that are falling. So, and when I say large, I'm talking about your tennis balls, 2-inch baseball type stuff. You might have a few of those falling, but they're going to be really isolated at this point. And the reason I can tell that is my correlation coefficient has come back. It is not where it was before. My differential reflectivity down here, not as great as it was. And look at all the melting the radar's wanting to tell me is going on. The radar doesn't like this storm producing really large hail. I'm also really close to the radar, which means I'm scanning this thing right off the ground. I mean, I'm probably 800 feet off the ground. So I really like the data that I'm getting right now. I think I'm able to produce a really good indication that I need to trail back my hail size. I need to say, hey, this isn't as big as what it was. But I'm also looking at it and going, I still got an inflow notch. There's a chance that this could increase in intensity and we could go back to having large hail. But remember, 2 or 3 frames before, we talked about that inflow notch kind of closed in. And the results of that are falling to the ground now. So that decrease in hail size is happening because of that close off. So now we need to see, can the storm cycle back up? So we're going to move it forward here. I'll clear it off with the pencil so that way we can kind of see what we've got as we continue to drop down to the south and east. And notice, as this storm, it almost looks like everything is, put the pencil on here, almost looks like everything is kind of trying to push to the left. See how the tilt of the storm is almost straight up and down now? Another indication that the storm is not super healthy. And so it's definitely a storm that we're concerned with being able to continue to grow and thrive at this point because of that. My inflow or my outflow boundary is now way down here. So it's really having a tough time connecting to the storm now. So I'm really beginning to get concerned. But I mean, my base reflectivity numbers that I'm seeing, look like super dark purple, right? It's storming. If you're driving around like you can't see anything, this feels like a bad storm. So where we're at now, again, if we look at this area is where you would think, looking at base reflectivity, I need to highlight that area as my big hail. But look, it's right here in this zone right here, which tells me that the hail is melting. I'm not nearly as green and blue as I was before, but I do have my gray here. So that tells me that we're seeing a pretty decent volume of hail falling, but it's not going to be significantly that large. So I'm going to be more focused on nickel quarter size hail, maybe some $half size hail, maybe a golf ball or two here or there. But for the most part, I bet if you're a contractor and you're looking in this area, which I feel like was pretty close to the Air Force Base. Let's see where it is if we zoom back in. Yeah, just off to the east of the Air Force Base. I bet your damage isn't as wild as it was back up to the north and east across, more parts south of Park City. I bet it was more significant than what you're seeing. Not saying that you won't see damage here, right? But I'm saying the likelihood is definitely a little bit lower based off of what we're seeing. Now, I will say the CC is a little bit lower here, right over the Air Force Base. So if I had to pick a spot in the storm that was producing golf ball size hail, this is the spot that I'm going to select. This is where I'm going to select now. So again, just kind of really honing in to how we break down these storms. This is literally how and I assume in the comments, kind of feel free to ask us, like, hey, what parts of this were you seeing? What do you think happened here? Because I think it would be kind of fun for us to really dissect individual locations to help you guys understand what we're seeing at individual locations. I'm trying to do this on a broad scale, which makes it kind of, well, we're all over the place. But it's definitely very effective with helping you understand what goes into this. So I'm going to chase this storm down. You will notice we get a brief area right. Let's see if this lines up here. We get a brief area right in here. That area continues to fall. So let's follow that area down to the south and east. And we kind of go back to a lot of green here. That area continues to move through right there. And we get a little bit more green right here. But notice that green, again, up underneath all this orange area. So again, tells me a lot of melting going on. This one on the backside, not as much. So if I were to draw a path of where I think, maybe there's a few larger stones would be right through there. But my high volume of hail is actually way over here. So I'm thinking that I'm getting very isolated hail, even though it might be bigger. There's not as many of them. Over here, it's much smaller, and we're seeing more of the hail. And again, that's usually an indication that our storm is kind of struggling right now. And then there you can see, boom, it disappears. And now all of a sudden we've got this second storm that's actually coming back into Wichita now. And so to really kind of set the stage, and we're going to jump through this second storm, but to set the stage, Taylor has really put together just how big this thing was, right? So the fact that we had this one storm come ripping through the city, now we've got this second storm. Taylor, show us, just how crazy and how wild this whole thing was to happen like this back to back.
Yeah, exactly. Back to back, right? We saw those storms. We talked about that storm moving from Salina all the way down 135 into McPherson, into Newton, just hitting city after city after city. Derik just talked about that first storm right there. But before we get to that second storm, I want to take you through this entire loop. And what I want to do is I want to put a ruler on it and show you just how extensive this storm was, or these three storms technically. We had one up in Salina, didn't last too long, but those second two, they did last very long. Over 100 miles of hail yesterday. Now, 100 miles of a hail swath yesterday. And if you go on to HailTrace.com, you'll see that swath that goes all the way down from Salina, down 135 into Wichita, and then across Wichita into I-35. That's whenever it started to weaken and produce those smaller hailstones and smaller hailstones and then start to weaken, which Derik kind of addressed as well. You know, we kind of thought, is the storm going to weaken? Is it going to stay all the way through Wichita, or is it going to weaken before it gets to the south side of Wichita? Now, another thing that I want to tell you about here is that we had a ton of lightning with this storm yesterday. And oftentimes we'll say that lightning and large hail are correlated, and there's a lot of science that goes into that. But that also shows you just the view that Kansans saw yesterday, that Wichitans saw yesterday. Tons of lightning. We could see this storm coming in. We've got great pictures to show you later on. But before we get to those pictures, I want to go back to that second storm, because we talked about that storm that went into north central Wichita. Now we're going to go to that second storm that was just on its tail. It was very, very interesting to watch this, because initially this looked like our hailer. This one, it looked impressive, but it wasn't as organized, in my opinion, whenever I just glanced at radar. But then we saw this storm go through Wichita, and all of a sudden, that northern storm, that second storm, looked a lot more impressive. It's about to go through the west side of Wichita here, right down 235. And Derik, I'll let you take over here, because I think that this is a very, very impressive second storm that came through. One of the things that I saw just right off the bat yesterday, whenever I was in Wichita, I was driving around, I was looking in the dark because there was a lot of power outages. I was looking at all of the impacts from this. I saw leaves everywhere, tree leaves scattered around, because what happens is this hail, it's going to go through the trees and it's going to basically strip these trees of all of their leaves, and then that wind blows it around everywhere. And at that, I will let you take over, Derik, with that second storm.
Insight into that, Taylor. And as we take a look at this second storm, you can see I've got the radar up here. You know, you had mentioned that the storm wasn't as organized, and we were worried about it, mainly because it's got to have fresh, warm air. And we've just had a big supercell thunderstorm plow through Wichita to potentially clear out that air. But that's not what happened in this case, right? So in this case, the atmosphere was able to reset, and then this storm came fully locked and loaded straight into the north side of Wichita. But in this case, had a little bit more oomph behind it with some wind. And so that's going to add a fifth element now that we're going to have to analyze, right? So now we're going to look at base reflectivity. We're going to look at our correlation coefficient to see our large objects. We're going to look at our differential reflectivity to see what volume of hail. And then we're going to look at our specific differential phase to where we can understand, is the hail melting? So right off the gate, what I'm showing you here is you can see we have super high base reflectivity. Our correlation coefficient, if you remember on the last storm, they kind of faded out to where we're seeing more oranges and red. Now we're back to greens and blue with this storm. And notice all the gray. If I highlight this area here, and maybe you can kind of see this, I don't know if you can see it, but I see it right away. Look how much this area overlaps, right? You see the low CCs, you see the gray, you see that overlap. Now, again, we do have some green here, but we don't have the yellows that we had with the other storm, right? So we still see that. Now, what we also see that piggybacks off of that, though, is this right here, right? So now all of a sudden, look at these low CCs that kind of trail off here, right? So now all of a sudden, we've got this shape that is formed with this storm. And you can see, I guess maybe the gray kind of piggybacked over here just a little bit. But this area right down in here has, and again, this is right up against the updraft. So the largest hailstones are going to fall right in this area. This is the area that we're going to see the baseball reports that came in. They're happening right in this area right here. That's where they're happening at right now. Now, as we fade off to the north in this part of the hailstorm right here, what we're going to start to see is our golf ball to 2-inch hail. And then we're probably going to start to see quarter to $half size hail up in this part of the storm. But it's going to be generally in that shape. All of this up here, lots of melting. This is going to be more of your pea to nickel size hail occurring up in this part of the storm. Okay, so now the one last thing that we want to take a look at, and I'm going to pull it up on this Let's take a look at our relative velocities. Do we have any high winds with this? It's always going to reset when I do this. So we're going to have to maneuver our way to that part of the storm. There goes storm number 1. I'm going to turn that pencil marks off. Storm number 1. Here comes storm number 2. And we're just going to look at the wind speeds with storm number 2 here. So what I notice is if we kind of hone in here. So there's Mays. There's 135 right here to Park City. We'll kind of hone in right here. So our strongest winds with this storm right now happening, and we're just going to highlight the winds here. So right in there right now, and then we might have another little pocket of some pretty good winds right in there. That actually is going to be outflow most likely. So actually, if you look at this, didn't start the drawing. When you draw, you always make weird noises like so there is most likely what looks like kind of like an outflow boundary trying to bust out, which means we're not going to be talking about tornadoes with this storm. But then as we continue down to the southeast, you can see, look at this pocket here of strong winds. I know we measured right here at the airport 58 mile per hour winds were measured right here. So we know for sure that we had 58 mile per hour winds there. And we had a 71 mile per hour wind gust that was closer over in this area, somewhere in that area. And you can kind of see those high winds. It might have been right there. That might be the spot that did it right there. And Taylor, you might be able to kind of feed us in on where you saw those power outages at. But those would be some of the areas that I would highlight. And notice right through there. So we're seeing strong winds here. And we're also seeing the largest hail. See how the green kind of overlaps there? So we're seeing some hail there. Now the highest volume of hail is actually happening way over here. And we're seeing some large hailstones here as well that are really coming down, really all the way down into that area of the storm. So, if we kind of break this down, so we're going to switch back to hail mode here, which is going to reset it. So give me a second to get us back. Differential reflectivity, we want that one. Okay, and then we've got when you're moving the radar forward, you make motor sounds. Car runs all the way across, and boom, there we go. So now we're in play, right? So we've got our hailstorm, we've got our differential reflectivity. So what are we looking at here? What in the world is going on with this hailstorm? And again, this one may be the most impactful hailstorm that Wichita got. Was this second hailstorm. Okay, so here we go. So we've got, kind of interesting enough, we've got almost 2 pockets of this pink area. We've got one here, and we've got another one here. Right, so that's kind of interesting right off the bat. That's something that I want to look at. Base reflectivity, though, first of all, pink doesn't mean hail. It could mean heavy rain. Sometimes red and orange mean hail. So you've got to be very careful with what you look at. A lot of times, though, you will see the pink line up with the gray, which the gray is telling us this is the area that is mostly hail falling. So we're going to have a higher volume of hail. If the size can be there, that can mean severe damaging hail event is underway. And that's kind of what we're seeing. So we've got this grayed out area. We've got this area, and probably the bottom half of it right down in here is going to be the area that's having the most impact with this storm. But our green area, notice, actually comes all the way kind of like that and actually fills in right in through there. So we're actually seeing large hailstones here. Our gray would say we're maybe getting a little bit more high volume right here. This is probably fairly isolated, and this is probably fairly isolated even back here. This is all probably fairly isolated. So we're seeing large hailstones falling. In fact, I would say the largest hail that you're seeing is probably coming out of this area right here. This area right here is getting the biggest hailstones. Let me clear it off. So biggest hailstones, right? Oh, come on, Derek. Click on the pencil. There we go. Biggest hailstones are happening right here. Highest volume of hailstones overlapped with the biggest hailstones are happening right here. So most damaging area, draw your path like that. That's probably the most damaging area of this hailstorm is going to be right in there. So we'll clear off the map. Where are we talking about? We're talking about clicking the pencil again. And then we're talking this and this. that is our most damaging area of the hailstorm, which is interesting, right? Because you're like, but wait a second, that doesn't line up with the pink that I'm used to saying that would be the most damaging part of the hailstorm. Notice how big this hailstorm is, and then how isolated we have to hone in where the biggest hail is. It's just really interesting to see how that breaks down and where it actually comes into play. Now, am I saying there's no damage back here? Absolutely not. There definitely could be damage. I'm saying the hail is more isolated back there. Am I saying that there's no damage up here? Kind of highlight this with my orange area. Absolutely not. I'm saying the hail's a little bit smaller up here, but the volume is a little bit higher up here. So I'm saying this middle square has the highest volume of large hail. This top square has the highest volume of medium size hail. And then this bottom square has the lowest volume of large hail. So we kind of break it down into 3 quadrants just like that. Really interesting how this storm kind of broke down as it moved across the metro. So we'll go down a couple more frames here, and we'll try to break it down a little bit more here for you. Now, I told you we were close to the radar earlier. Now we're really close to the radar. I mean, we're scanning this thing as low as you possibly can, and the storm is looking healthy still. It's hard to see the inflow notches kind of back here up underneath over the airport. The 58 mile per hour winds, probably from what we would call a rear flank downdraft. But it looks like that's probably about where everything is happening. So let's break this thing down again. Okay. Just like we did the frame before. So we're going to take a look here. So we've got all of our hot pink, right? Let's just kind of highlight that as an area that we want to highlight. Now we want to take a look at our gray areas down here to tell us where is the higher volume of hail happening. So it's a little bit more inside of that area, but it is still inside of that area, and actually really lines up. See how the pink's not as deep back here. So that's kind of interesting. And then where are deeper greens happening? So kind of go there, and it looks like it's got a little wing there. It kind of comes down in here, and actually, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I actually see that green trying to come back here. It gets really difficult. And when we say weather's messy, this is literally what we're talking about. But I see that green even trying to nose its way down there, and then literally coming all the way up. And even trying to look at that little nose, and look at that, lines up perfect with that. It's almost like it knows what it's doing. Okay, so what that tells me is there's a big area with some, ping pong ball to golf ball to tennis ball size hail. There's a big area that's having it. So now we got to break it down. We got to go who's having isolated big hail, who's having lots of maybe medium size hail with a few big hailstones, and who's having lots of big hailstones or lots more of the big hailstones. That's what we want to break down, right? That's what we're interested in. Very difficult to put all that into a hail map, but if I had to highlight an area that I have the most interest in, it's going to be, let's see if this works out here. I'm trying to highlight it on 4 different parameters. Okay. Sorry guys, here I'm looking at 3 different things here at once. That's the area. Okay, so if I have to pick an area where I would want to go look for the largest hail, that's my spot, right? And that's because I have really good gray. So my gray overlaps. I have good base reflectivity, but my low CCs, I'm also not seeing a lot of melting going on. Up in here, I'm thinking, sub quarter to nickel, dimes, like lots of those, lots of heavy rain. This next quadrant right here. Okay, let's see if we kind of break this down here. So that's maybe some isolated severe hail. This area right in here, all the way down into here, kind of like this. That's where I think, we could still be seeing damaging hail. I think the size of the hail's down just a little bit, but I still think there's a decent volume of hail, and I'm also not seeing a lot of melting. And there could be a little pocket right in here. You're seeing that pocket right there in the middle of the storm, right in here. That the hail might be a little bit smaller right there. And then I think my larger isolated stuff is going to kind of trail off back here close to the airport. You might even see a few big hailstones all the way down into this part of Wichita here. So this is what it takes to break down a significant hailstorm. These are the types of things that we're looking at. So if you were to ask a meteorologist, what do you think's happening at this address? If I were to draw a dot on this address, right? It's gotta have my pencil still. If you were to say what happened at this address, it's fairly simple, right? It's fairly simple for us to break down the overlay and to really kind of focus on this one dot on the map. But when you're saying, tell me what's happening in this entire area of this storm, it gets really, really complex. And there are different regions that are doing different things. I would be amazed if you had if you had the ability to break down every single hailstorm like we're doing right now. I almost think I could tell you every address that had damaging hail. But it's just not that simple. And hopefully you can kind of see how complex this is. Hopefully you've taken some notes and you're kind of going back and looking at this data and going, okay, Derik circled this neighborhood. Let me go check that neighborhood out. Derik circled this neighborhood over here. Let me check that neighborhood out. That's my hope. I want you guys to go out and be super successful with what you do. I want you to have a really good storm, right? This is a big opportunity, and we get it here at HailTrace, and we're super excited for you. But how big was the opportunity? I think, outside of looking at it from a radar respect and to really kind of close this out, Taylor, I think you've got lots of video and pictures and kind of the fun part of, I think you call them Wichitans. What'd you call them? Wichitans. The Wichitans, they came out in full force. Show us what they got.
The Wichitans, yes. So I saw this storm coming on radar yesterday, and I used to live in Wichita, so I was psyched to drive up to Wichita and check out this storm. So I got there just a little after the storm hit, and I wanted to see what was happening in this area. And you were exactly right, Derik. I think that this second storm, as it organized as it came into the city, really was the most impactful storm. I went up to the north central area, northeastern area, and it was just so dark. The power was out in so many different areas. It was very, very difficult to see what was going on. But in this area on the west side of the city, we absolutely saw that wind impact. Now you're going to see a few pictures and videos here. And John, you can throw those up on MC2 right now. That's perfect. And you're going to see just how much, there you go. Trees and leaves are on the ground from those strong winds, pulling down those tree limbs, tossing around those leaves. At times, it felt like leaves were stuck to cars. It looked like paint splatter on the cars. But of course, Derik broke down exactly what we saw from the hail as well. And you can see some of those hail sizes right there. Nice clear hail photos. We love that, especially whenever there's something to compare it to. We also have some videos that people took while the storm was happening. Let's take a look at that.
Go full size hail! This is what I've been waiting for!
Well, ain't that some shit? Thought I was going to sit outside and be protected from the hail. Bullshit. Bullshit.
you can tell the passion that people had. They wanted to watch that storm come in, but unfortunately it was quite impactful, tearing up that backyard there. You could see that in all of the pictures and videos that we got in yesterday. We really appreciate. As always, DM us your pictures and videos of the storms that come into your area, and follow us for more weather. We post every single day about the weather that's happening across the entire country. So follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And if you want a simpler version of what Derik broke down today, you know, he gave you all of that weather knowledge, but you don't have to have that weather knowledge to know exactly where the largest hail fell. You don't have to have the weather knowledge to know exactly where the strongest wind was, and we even do tornado maps as well. So give us a call at 855-334-4245 to get set up with a map, and email us at info@hailtrace.com if maybe calling isn't your thing, and head over to our website, hailtrace.com. Not only do you get more information at hailtrace.com, but you can also check out our blog and get more weather information just like this. All right, thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Derik, for all of your time that you gave this afternoon, giving us some of that vital weather information and explaining just what set these two hailstorms in Wichita apart from all the other hailstorms that we got this year. All right, thanks for joining us. We'll be back here with your noon forecast every single weekday.